We begin with the captain's log announcing the eradication of the Fyrox plague. Just another day of being big damn heroes. So Picard relaxes with a good book. Only... Damn monoliths are really getting pushy these days. Picard vanishes, but the oddity is picked up, so Worf rushes down with a team to check it out. Picard awakens in a room with 4 beds in it, 2 others already occupied. So, isn't it a surprise when Worf arrives at Picard's quarters and finds the captain is just fine? Picard finds a Bolian cadet, and a guy named Thal, a non-Federation alien who's been here for at least 12 days. Besides the door, the only other thing here is a food dispenser in the middle of the room, which just drops little gelatinous-looking hockey pucks. The door has a panel, but the combination is too complex to be hit randomly. If you keep it up, you get zapped for your trouble. All in all, not the worst dungeon we've seen, but not exactly a vacation either. It's what I imagine a 5-star suite in North Korea looks like. Back on the Enterprise, Picard is told that the USS Hood is waiting at the rendezvous coordinates for them, acknowledges this fact, and then decides not to go there anyway. He says they're heading to a nearby pulsar in the Lanka cluster, and at warp 2, turning what should normally be a half-hour journey into 31 hours. What's more, Picard says no one is to send out any messages without his permission, including letting the Hood know that they're going to be running late. This is naturally very odd, so this Picard gets ahead of that by taking Riker aside and saying, "Look, obviously I try to keep you in the loop. If I ever don't, I've got a really good reason for it, so you just have to believe me. And yeah, I know it's going to be trying, but I have total confidence in your ability to manage this situation despite that situation." He's basically patting him on the back on one hand while shoving him out the door with the other, and Riker completely falls for it. In the prison, Picard uses the door control to tap out the first 6 prime numbers to demonstrate higher-level reasoning to their captors, to perhaps open a dialogue. He also is trying to figure out what they might want with the 3 of them. Although maybe they were curious on seeing a Bolian with hair and a human without, wondered if there might have been some mix-up. But seriously, note that Picard is not in any way surprised or finds it notable that Martina has hair, suggesting that it is common enough that it doesn't factor into his consideration of what makes the 3 of them significant. Instead, he thinks about the current tensions that the Bolians have with another alien race, which prompts Thal to say his race has no enemies.
The last 300 years of Miserian history, your planet has been conquered 6 times.
Yes, but they were very friendly about it. Soon the 4th member of this party arrives, some kind of Wookalar, suck your brains right out your nose. Dude's mad, and Picard has a really, really important diplomacy role he's going to have to make if they're not going to get skewered. Fortunately, he has actually visited this guy's planet, so he's finally able to get him to put the knife away. That will make the conversation slightly less awkward. More awkward is on the Enterprise, when Picard comes by during the poker game to loom over them like the spirit of kibitz. He asks Geordi to up the energy efficiency, and then takes Troy aside to inquire about how the crew is handling things. At first just a natural concern, but as before, it goes further as he wonders how far their trust in him goes. It's really creepy. He feels like I'd imagine a lunch with Mark Zuckerberg would go. Essek has calmed down enough to at least talk, but doesn't have anything insightful to add to their predicament. Shocking as that might be to hear. When the subject turns to the Romulans, Thal says they might be interested in him for his intelligence, that even among his people he's considered a genius. As for Essek, there's a big problem for him. Seems that hockey puck is made of something that's poisonous to his people.
Does this mean there's nothing here for you to eat?
Oh boy, time to see if the pen is mightier than the fork. Picard finally gets Essek to not start tenderizing Thal just yet. But his people have high caloric demands, it seems. He can only go 3 or 4 days before he'll starve to death. So, that's a ticking clock right there, because Essek is not going to meekly allow himself to starve, and that will mean either Picard finds a way to kill him, or they're stuck in a small room watching him gnaw on the warm corpse of Thal while waiting for their turn. But what is disappointing and reflective of the larger problems of the story is that this horrifying possibility isn't hinted at. This began as an intellectual puzzle. We're in a room. Who put us here? Why? How do we get out? Now that urgency has been added, the atmosphere remains unaltered. What's more, despite the obviousness that he is 3 or 4 days from death, Thal's motivation to help remains unchanged, as if he'd rather get slaughtered for his meat rather than taking any action, even non-violent action, that might avert that. This could be justified as an alien way of thought, but it's not. It's as if he just doesn't realize that it's possible that this could be happening, and Picard doesn't use this to try to motivate him in any way. It's all dismissed as just base cowardice. Allegiance is a bottle show, but while Duet would prove how powerful a bottle show can be, Allegiance is already showing how weak one can be. The reason for this is likely that Picard's storyline is an afterthought, and that for those making it, the real story of the episode is of an imposter captaining the Enterprise with an unclear motive. He goes to Dr. Crusher for a physical, getting his annual one a month ahead of time, but it says, well, he's fine. The tricorder can't detect any evil, though. He finishes by inviting her to a private dinner in his quarters. What we are seeing with him is essentially what would happen if someone dialed back Picard's restraint slightly, allowing him to do the things that he wouldn't normally do. Back in the cell, "This is why we can't have nice things. You always bring your friends over." Martina overrides the lock on the door, briefly. It closes up then and hits them all with a green pain beam until they collapse, while Thal helpfully gives them an "I told you so." Well, back on the Enterprise, the dinner is set for romance, and everything short of rose petals is on display, and Picard is open about regrets about their detachment. But Dr. Crusher points out it's not quite as simple as them both finding each other attractive.
Would it be simpler if I were not your commanding officer?
Could you describe it in terms of numbers or other concepts? If this were a fish, what kind of fish would it be? They finally dance, then kiss, and when she asks if he's playing games with her, says, "Oh, no, no. And by the way, nighty-night, don't let the door hit you where God split you." Back in the cell, suspicion falls on Thal for avoiding the beam and trying to talk them out of escaping, plus the fact that his people have a long history of working with their conquerors. Well, in his panic, Thal starts throwing suspicion on everybody else. First Essek, since he has a knife, then Martina, since her tinkering triggered the beam, and finally Picard for bossing them all around. Well, she finally leaps to Picard's defense, listing the things that he's done to help other races, prompting Picard to mention their most recent planet, where she points out the Fyrox plague. Plus, I have it on good authority Picard always tips at least 20%. Back on the Enterprise, something about Picard seems off.
We'll fight and we'll conquer again and again. Come cheer up, my lads, 'tis to glory we steer.
I just can't put my finger on anything specific. So Riker gathers the senior officers, saying that any of these things they could accept, but they just keep piling up to say something is wrong here, especially when that energy reading from Picard's quarters was never explained. They're not going to actually do anything yet. No one wants to say they relieved the captain for singing a drinking song, but they're going to have to be ready in case shit gets real. Back in the cell, Picard says that, yes, there's no proof that he is the real deal, no proof that any of them are who they say they are, but if they stop trusting each other, they'll never get out, and then the giant is going to grind their bones to make his bread. On the Enterprise, they finally reach the pulsar, but they're so close that the shields only have about 18 minutes before the radiation will overwhelm them. Now that we're so close, Picard gets down to the important mission of doing fuck all. Riker takes him aside and demands to know their mission, that if Picard doesn't, he's going to take command. Damn the consequences.
Has it occurred to you that you might be the one with the problem?
It's the tales of Captain Gaslighting. Did you know, number one, that Spock has a human adopted sister who travels through time because of killer robots from the future? You are so obviously making that up, Captain. When the shields start failing and Picard still orders them to approach the pulsar into fatal range, Riker has had enough, and Worf will not obey Picard's order to remove him from the bridge. Even Wesley is listening when Riker orders him to turn around and fly off before they all get crispied. And in the cell, Picard uses Essex's knife to deal with the green beam so they won't get zapped again. But it doesn't matter because on the other side of that door is nothing but a wall. That seems to satisfy Picard, though, and demands that the cadet reveal herself as the one who's behind this. Her knowledge of the Fyrox plague had tipped her hand. Sure enough, they reveal themselves as aliens here to learn about alien interaction with a series of tests and challenges. But now that the cat's out of the bag, it's over. You can't do a psychological experiment on someone who knows that they're being experimented on. They're going to find ways to screw with you. When Picard returns, his doppelganger drops the act, and they get on with acting like the superior race with every right to study other life forms. So Picard subtly indicates to his crew to lock up the aliens for a little while, just to teach them to not go around kidnapping people anymore. They're finally let go, cue some sultry Picard crusher bridge tension, and the end. Post-episode follow-up, annoying character goes to Thal. Even Star Trek needs a Dr. Smith, I guess. Final score for this one might be controversial, but I'm going to give it a score of 4 out of 10, as I consider it a slightly below average episode of TNG. Yes, it has Picard acting differently, which can be a novelty, and I'm not saying that it's irredeemable. There are some fine moments in here, like when Riker stands up to Picard, or during that romantic dinner and such. The problem is, though, the story itself is just extremely unsatisfying. It's so dry. The entirety of it is an intellectual exercise without any of the intellectual pleasure that goes along with such a thing. This episode definitely needed a better script that could really give it some life. There's potential here, but it's just squandered.